Like directing is making sure that the vision in your head ends up on the screen, which means communicating as clearly as possible.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cinematography for Actors podcast. I'm Indiana, and Haeleigh is sitting across from me, and we have another guest. Sydney Ribot is here, who is one of our favorite people on earth, and then one of the most talented directors we both know. So welcome, Sydney.
Thank you. It's very kind.
This is really
Happy to be
exciting
here.
for me because I feel like Sydney is one of the most eloquent and erudite people I've ever met. And I feel like I can also trust you as like a judge of things that are morally right or morally wrong.
Yeah.
Kind of, you're almost 100% like right all the time. And so I feel like having you on this podcast will give us so much gravitas because you're just right always. No pressure.
I mean, your middle and your initials together are actually senior. So you just like know shit. You know what I mean?
Sydney knows everything. It's the new podcast.
Yeah. Sydney talks life. No, Sydney
No
is,
pressure.
yeah, I know. So we went to AFI together and that's kind of how we met, but we didn't really become friends until the pandemic, which lucky for me, because now, I mean, this little trio we have going on has been a lot of fun.
This really is a pandemic friends trio.
It is, because you and I also became
We weren't friends until we had to learn how to roller skate outside.
correct.
Whoa.
It's true.
I know.
And we became friends when Indiana assigned us to the same room
Thrust us
in
into-
Poland
You're
during
right.
Camerimage.
Twin
And we
beds.
bonded sharing a tiny, extremely high-ceilinged room in
Yeah.
Torun for 9 days.
Yeah. Let's talk where you're from and how you got into film and how you ended up at AFI so we could meet.
Oh, how did I get into film? So I grew up in a small town in Northwest Georgia and had no connection to the film industry. But I had always loved films. Both of my parents are big movie fans. My father's from Argentina. My mom's from Atlanta. And they always had very different experiences of movies. And I'll age myself by saying that I used to check out a lot of movies at Blockbuster.
Yes.
And
Love that.
We checked out a lot of movies at Blockbuster. It was where I could get away with watching, my parents were quite strict, but I could get away with watching more scandalous movies as long as it was foreign cinema. And then my mother wouldn't look too closely.
Wow.
And, you know, so-
Dangerous was
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah,
something
that y tu mamá también, which you would think she would have looked into because her
Right.
my father, her husband, is a native Spanish speaker, but she was just like, just put it in the pile. And I watched The Dreamers that way, and those probably had formative impacts on my view of the
Wow.
world, for better or worse. But yeah, I was very into film always. I also was painting and doing 2-dimensional visual art and writing, but I didn't quite understand how I could be involved in filmmaking. But as a kid, it was very important to me in the sense that, so as I said, my parents were from different countries. Their love story is still so inspiring to me as an adult. I think they are #goals, but obviously you're going to have some kind of clashes when you have people from different backgrounds. And during these clashes, and they could be some small differences, like my mother is a Southern belle in a way, and you know, in the South you eat with after you take a fork and a knife and you cut something, you are supposed to switch hands and eat with your right hand with a fork. And in Argentina and a lot of places in Europe, you just keep the fork in the hand that you cut whatever you're cutting and you eat it like that. Even something small like that we take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
If you're raising kids and you're like, this is the civilized way to do it, and you don't agree on what that is, different viewpoints.
Wow,
But
different
so
worlds.
different
That's
worlds.
hilarious.
Yeah,
Wow.
you would think it's not a big thing, but it can be. But my parents would end up, you know, sometimes my mom would need to get out of the house for a breather, and they have a lot of passion, and so she would. And when I was a kid, she would. You know, sometimes she'd go out of the house. My mother's a very glamorous woman, and she would put on her dark sunglasses and be pulling the car out. And I would, you know, as a kid, not understand that she was coming back. And I would be like, Mom, where are you going? And she would roll down the window and she would pull down she wouldn't even pull down her glasses. She would just say, to the cinema. And she'd say, I'm going to the movies. And I would say, when are you coming back? And she'd say, when I'm done. And then I would go back into the house, and my dad would now, who's now being despondent, would be like, do you want to watch something? Do you want to watch something? And it would always be something with subtitles. It would be like The Lives of Others. Whereas my mother likes Hollywood movies, and he would watch something that basically was from probably European or some foreign cinema that represented a world in which he was not wrong. And we would watch that together. And then my mom would come back from watching whatever was on in Hollywood at the time. Usually something that makes her happy about the world in a way. She doesn't like watching movies that are sad. And then they would come back, and I thought, wow, this is so magical that like movies can really make you feel less alone. And I wanted to be part of that, and I felt instinctively that I should be part of that. But of course, my dad being an immigrant was like, you need to be a doctor or a lawyer. So I didn't do that. I actually got a job that was completely unrelated. At Harvard Business School right after college, where I was writing a book on capital markets and sustainability. And I was sitting in the basement of Morgan Hall, surreptitiously typing up fiction and then printing it on the HBS printers. And I was spending the rest of my day talking to 65-year-old C-suite executives about environmental, social, and governance indicators. And I was just like, I think I'm a director. At the time it was just an idea, and I thought, okay, I'm obviously a very visual person. I had studied visual arts. I had done an exchange at the Glasgow School of Art that was painting and as I said, 2D visual art. And I'd been always writing, and I had sort of thought, okay, cool. I'm sitting here doing data analysis in Cambridge. That's nice. But actually I feel I sound like a management consultant, underutilized.
Okay, got it.
And I just thought, like, Germans call film like the Gesamtkunstwerk, like it's like the sum of all of the artworks. And it was sort of like, I don't want to say that I felt, sitting in my rolly chair in this horrible fluorescent lit basement hall of Harvard Business School thinking, okay, fiction is not enough. I need to be able to make art with people, and it needs to be, I need to work with people and visuals to make the thing that I want to make. And the other thing that's important to me about that is my family is very diverse in the sense that I have relatives who have professional degrees and they're highly educated and speak multiple languages. And I've got cousins who didn't go to college. Yeah. And the thing about movies is if you make a good movie, anybody will feel it. Yeah. Anybody will get it.
That's why it's like they say that the best cinematography, which I agree with, is one where you don't notice that it's within the story itself. It just means like, it's just, yes, that's exactly how we're telling the story, and it's so on the same page. And I think that translates, how like people were like growing up, I don't know if they said this to you, but that math is the only universal language. I think cinema is also a universal language, because you don't need subtitles sometimes if every single department is working together and is on the same page. So that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Take, math teachers. Math is not the only universal language.
There we go.
Turns out.
Cinema it is.
It's cinema.
It's beautiful. I love that. Yeah.
And then, okay.
So then.
Come on.
Okay. So then, I'm sorry, this has been an indulgent. An indulgent long runway to how I actually picked up a camera. So while I was sitting there in Cambridge, I started scheming and going, okay, well, here's the tricky part about wanting to direct movies is no one will give you money to make anything until you've made things.
I know.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, how do you have 3 years of experience without any experience? And every job requires 3 years of experience.
Exactly. It's very chicken or the egg. So I was sitting there and I was like, surely we can come up with something. And so along with a couple of the other, our job title was technically research associate. Yeah. There was another girl who she'd gone to Harvard and she was Korean American, but she had studied Mandarin. I had studied Turkish, and obviously she spoke Korean. I spoke Spanish as well. But in terms of trying to figure out how we could use something, it's like, okay, well, there's too many people who speak Spanish. It's not special at the time. And in her case, there weren't enough people who learned Mandarin properly who are American citizens. And both of us were going, okay, so we started messing around. We went to B&H Photo Video. We downloaded Adobe Premiere Pro. We got all of the free resources from the Harvard libraries to learn about screenplays and everything, and just were in the library. And then we started shooting our own stuff. And we thought, okay, but let's be a little bit more ambitious. I helped her shoot her first short film. And then we thought, how can we get money to start? How do we get money to start making movies? And I did what anyone would do, which was apply to a Fulbright and another grant.
Yes.
Like, as you do. Normally, that's what everyone does.
I thought you were going to say Kickstarter.
Okay. I did that second.
Okay.
But the first thing I did was I thought, okay, what are the tools in my arsenal if I want to be a filmmaker? On what basis can I convince people to give me money so that I can start proving myself? Both to myself and to other people. And I thought, what do I have that other people may not have? And I spoke Turkish fluently. And just like this other friend spoke Mandarin fluently. And we started researching grants, international grants, diplomacy grants. So we thought, of course, we will start making movies in our third language. That's how we're going to start making films. And we got the grants. So which at the time, the professor I was working for thought I was completely nuts. And he was just like, why do you have to be so weird? Why do you have to go to Turkey? And I said, no. I have my reasons, Bob.
There's a reason.
Yeah. And that was it. And we were, and I thought, okay. And I literally put together this grant application. At the time, Netflix was talking about going to Turkey. They still hadn't gone to Turkey. This was in 2013.
Okay.
2013. They hadn't gone to Turkey. They've been talking about it. I had kind of snuck into some of the Harvard Business School Media Summit groups and sort of heard what the HBO people and CEOs were talking about. And I knew that they were going to try to expand. Netflix was trying to expand to Poland, which they now have done, to Turkey. And I thought, oh, okay, I can make an eventual argument for what I'm doing here in this country that has 84 million people with a language that isn't spoken anywhere else, really. It's spoken in variations in Central Asia, but it's not like Mandarin, where it's over a billion people speak it, for why it matters. And the other thing that I sort of had in my arsenal was thinking about how post 9/11, the Americans don't really know anything about the Middle East. There's a lot of there's a lot of people freaking out. And I know you spent time in the Middle East as well. So it's close to your heart, but it was something that I genuinely love. Turkey. It's like my second home, and
I get it.
People really have the wrong idea. And I felt that, and I wanted to make at the time
fight that.
I wanted
so
to fight
hard.
that, and I wanted to. And it's like, it's funny because in times I want to fight it, but also you're like, well, I don't know, maybe it's better that the world hasn't discovered, that hasn't stormed the gates, so it doesn't become like Dubrovnik in summer, where you're just swimming through tourists, hordes of people. But it's really a wonderful place. And I remember in the actual grant application that some of the evidence that I marshaled was, Turks have such a bad reputation in the US that even Chobani Greek yogurt, which is founded by Hamdi Ulukaya, who's a he's a Kurdish guy from Turkey, markets it as Greek.
Yes.
Because Americans would not buy it if you said it's Turkish yogurt. So even he was like, oh, okay, like people get conservative there and they think, oh, I can't, I'm not sure if I have the confidence to do it. And I think there is something in me also, as I'm a dual citizen with Argentina, that I kind of recognize this, where it's like a lot of people think that Argentines are really stuck up. Yeah. And in the Spanish speaking world, it's like everybody thinks Argentines are like, oh, somos divinos. And we do say that, and where they're like, oh, well, like, look at us, we're the beautiful people or whatever. And Argentines do say that, but also Argentines are very insecure on the international stage, and they don't have the confidence. Like it's like, why is dulce de leche not in every single supermarket? Right. Like the Argentines just don't market things to the rest of the world. And Turks also have this issue, I think, where it's like, you have so many great things to offer. Why is Turkey not on the same level as South Korea? Right. Which now everybody knows. Yeah. And so I applied saying, look, the only coverage of Turkish people in Western media is, okay, we have Chobani Greek yogurt. You also have the James Bond villain, I forget in which movie, who's supposed to be Turkish, but he's played by a Mexican actor. Whoa. And then you have the Midnight Express. That's about how, evil and horrible the Turkish prisons are, which I would argue are probably not any worse than American prisons at all. Right. Yeah. Right. But that's the take that people have. And it's funny to me where I go, actually, I don't, the myth that Americans are so humane compared to the rest of the world. It's something that deserves to be problematized a little bit.
So
Problematize.
there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you got the grant and went over and started making films.
Yes. So I got the grant. I left, I got the grant. I left Cambridge in 2013, which was around 2013 summer, which is when the Gezi Park protests were happening in Istanbul. And I moved there, and I had agreed to, this was sort of the tricky part. I had agreed with this professor at HBS to write a book with him. And because he said, help me help you. You're going to be poor for a while, aren't you? And I said, probably. And he goes, okay, well, you need people to actually rent you a house or rent you an apartment. Okay, this will give you some legitimacy so people don't think you're just a sort of untrustworthy artist. So I agreed to co-author this book with him, and called The Integrated Reporting Movement. And I was writing that book while I was in Istanbul meeting people. So I only knew, I had studied in Turkey and in Syria in college, and then I had gone back to Turkey on a critical languages scholarship, which is a State Department language immersion in Izmir, to really cement it the summer after college before I started my first job. And I didn't know that many people in Istanbul. I went, and I just went to a lot of raves. And I
did not know this.
Yeah, I went. That's what, if people are like, how did you get started making movies? Well, I had my equipment, right? So I had a 5D Mark III. I had a boom microphone, an ambient noise microphone. I had the wireless microphones, and I was there you go. It's a great camera.
It's fantastic.
It's a fantastic camera. I've had it for a decade.
I've traveled to over 30 countries with this camera. It has been in every kind of weather there could be on Earth, and it's still an awesome camera.
It's a brick.
Yep.
It's a brick. It's impossible to
it's amazing.
Yes.
Completely weatherproof. Yeah.
Totally weatherproof.
Amazing.
So I feel you.
Yeah. So I went, and the thing was going again, I didn't want to make everybody thought, oh, did you come here to make a documentary? And the answer was no. Either Turkish people would say, oh, are you making documentaries? Because that's what foreigners do.
Yeah.
Or the other question that older ladies would ask me, and other Turkish people, they think this is the other legitimate reason for coming to Turkey. They would say, oh, did you come here for love? And that's
wow.
Yeah. And they would say, oh,
Wow.
you came for love. And I would say, well,
in a way,
let's hadi bakalım, let's see. But I came with a film grant. So I was going, okay, cool. I'm just meeting people, and I was working on a script, and there was a script that I really wanted to shoot, but I wanted to shoot with a proper crew. But I thought, who's going to agree to shoot with me if I don't have any evidence?
Right.
I have to do a DIY film first. So I made a romantic comedy about a German guy dating a Turkish girl. And the way that I got people doing that was I just partied a lot.
Wow.
And I met people, and I met a lot of people out. I'm a creature of the night, and I'm an extreme extrovert. So I would go out and just meet people and just feel the vibe and the energy. And at the time there were a lot of parties and raves, and there were a lot of Germans coming from Berlin and lots of mixing of people. And the way that I got started in film was just having my materials ready, so that everybody always thinks that people are talking. Everybody's always like, oh, I have a script, I have an idea. And it's like, well, bet you don't expect me to email you the next day with my script, storyboard, and shooting schedule, do you?
I got it right here for you.
Yeah. And that really calls people on their bluff. So I remember meeting people at parties and actually being quite grateful to be a woman, because I could ask people directly. I could ask these beautiful, charismatic women, hey, do you want to be in a movie? And I don't sound...
Yeah,
absolutely.
You're not doing anything.
Yeah.
I don't sound weird. I don't sound weird. I would just, and that's how it started. I met this woman called Vildan at a party who had this very striking face, and we were talking, and I said, "Hey, actually, I've got a romantic comedy idea that I'm doing." And she was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. I could do it." She was a TV host, and I said, are you interested? Do you want to act in it? And she was like, yeah. I mean, after several drinks, right? And so at this party, and then of course she didn't expect me to follow up on it. And then the next day I was like, great, here's the script. This is the guy who I think is going to play the boyfriend. Are you in? And then at that point she was so, okay. She said yes.
Yeah.
And that started everything.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Get out there and be prepared.
Amazing. Guys, I want to ask you something. I've never asked anybody this, and I've known that certain people think this way. I think. And maybe I just don't, or maybe some people do and some people don't. But the way you talk, Sydney, about the way that you planned and looked ahead and like, I did this to cement this, or I said, okay, I want to do this. So what do I have in my arsenal? Yada, yada, like this story you're telling. It's like you have seen 30 years in advance and just kind of like placed the markers, and then you like know exactly what to do to get to those goals. And I feel like nothing happens to you in your life that's a surprise, like not in a bad way, but I mean like things will still surprise you. But I mean like you don't make a decision that is a surprise to you. Like you have planned what you're going to do and how you're going, or what you want and how you're going to get it. And that is so impressive to me and so foreign to me because my life just like fucking happens to me. Like how do you do that?
But I also think that any kind of career as a director requires being entrepreneurial and planning, because the fact is, unless you've just got a big trust fund floating you, you're not going to be able to tread water long enough to actually develop the product, your future scripts and whatever your IP is, in order to cling on to the rocky embankment and make it into something that could sustain you.
I want to know where this secret sauce comes from.
Where does the planning come from? Let's see. I mean, not to jump head first into daddy issues, but my father is very entrepreneurial. But I don't think it's that, because I think what I've done even scares him.
Yeah.
Right. So I can't quite say that this is all the responsibility of Hugo Ribot, but he is. I will say that I don't think he's ever seen a mountain that couldn't be scaled.
Right.
And in the sense that he's a surgeon, he's an OBGYN and does a lot of laparoscopic outpatient surgery. And he wanted to build an ambulatory surgery center, was tired of operating through the hospital, which costs more for patients as well, because the hospital charges all these fees. And in 99% of his surgeries, the patient doesn't need to stay overnight. So he went, when I was in high school, he was collecting all this data so that he could prove that it would be safe to open an ambulatory surgery center. And now people fly from cross country to it. So, I mean, I definitely saw the planning of that. And I can't underestimate the degree to which just having a dad who never said, no, you can't do it. He always said, how can we do it?
Mine were the same, actually.
And I think your parents are very similar in that regard, that I never heard, oh no, you can't do this. Even now, I have scared him. He did not like, my parents did not like that I was in Turkey. I was in Turkey for 6 years, and then every year off and on for over 10 years. And during a lot of those 6 years, there was in 2015, 2016, there was a bombing every month in Istanbul. And I did not want to leave until I had filmed the things that I wanted to film. And, at the time I would be, I think at that point, my dad was mad, but he wasn't so upset about my mom. My mother would just call me and be say, when you have children, you'll understand, and then hang up. But my dad, I mean, I was there during the coup attempt in 2016 July, and there were like F-16s flying over my apartment at like fast enough to break the sound barrier, which was scary. I don't want to underplay that. And windows were being shattered and things like that.
God.
And, and my dad called me, and I remember he FaceTimed me, and he was sitting in the labor and delivery ward at the hospital eating donuts. And he's like, so there's a coup right now. And my dad's from a family where they moved country multiple times. I mean, Argentina had a dictatorship in the 70s. He moved to the Bahamas, and they eventually moved to Miami, and his parents moved to Mexico and then back to Miami. And so there's been a lot of diaspora in his life and upheaval. And, my mom has just been in the South her whole life. And so he was sort of like, so things are getting wild. And he didn't seem visibly alarmed. He just sort of said, he said, well, being your father is kind of like being strapped to a missile or being sort of riding shotgun in a James Bond movie. He's like, I'm not going to say I like what you're doing to us right now. But it is not thrilling.
How far after the coup did you go to AFI?
I went to AFI. I started AFI 2018 August.
And when was the coup?
The coup was 2016. So
wow.
I stayed in Turkey another 2 years. I mean, that's sort of
Right.
mine. I had buckled down and I was like, I'm not leaving. I'm not done here. And I did. I shot another movie there and I shot some other small things. And then I went to Beijing and filmed a romantic thriller in China.
A
and then came
romantic
back.
thriller?
A romantic thriller
What is
in
that?
China. What is that? It should have been a feature. And then I just stupidly just only shot a 26-minute movie. I should have just gone full steam ahead. It started off being a very small thing that a Chinese friend who had, again, partied with me in Istanbul. You'll see a running theme.
I love it.
She had said, "Hey, what do you have any other scripts? What do you have? I like your stuff in Turkey, but nobody speaks Turkish." Like,
We only became friends after we went dancing together.
Look, you know.
Oh, and we were out all night.
And
too.
we were out all night.
Oh my god!
All right.
How to befriend Sydney Ribot?
If
You gotta party all night.
If we
Gotta
haven't
prove yourself.
if we haven't partied together, we're not friends.
Yeah.
I think that's probably
It's said here.
Wow.
said here.
That's
I
so
think
funny.
that is probably true. That you know
Wow.
what? I just need I need people who want to enjoy life.
Yeah.
You know,
Fair. Very fair.
right? You can't just be all about work.
Yeah. So, okay, sorry. Romantic thriller was.
No, so I did this romantic thriller in Beijing because a producer friend put me up to it and another friend. And I originally had written it. It was a short called Turing Test that was about these two foreign finance guys on who had gotten really hammered and in one case taken some drugs at a party, hooked up with a girl. She passes out and then one of them starts getting really paranoid that she's dead. And the other one starts freaking out thinking they're in the back of a taxi. And the other one starts freaking out thinking, oh my God, well, you know, should you go back to get her or because drugs are so looked upon so harshly, do I need to save my own skin or what's going on? And then as they're talking and getting more and more frantic, the driver who's listening to, I think I had him listening to Dashan, which is like crosstalk comedy in bilingual English and Mandarin. The driver is laughing at something that happens at the exact moment that you would laugh appropriately in English. And then they start getting paranoid that the driver's listening to them and start trying to understand, is he going to blackmail us?
Can't believe I have not seen this.
Yeah, whoa.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, we gotta watch
I'll
it.
send it to you.
Did
but
you
yeah.
get in with that film? Is that what you
I
submitted?
did. Yeah,
Okay.
I got in with that film. So I hadn't finished shooting the entire film.
Okay.
We'd shot part of it in Beijing and then we had to shoot some of it in Istanbul, which was a separate adventure trying to find Mandarin speakers.
So what is the application process for a director for AFI? Is it one film that you submit?
No, I can't remember. I think it was, they want to see two films.
Mhm.
I mean, but that scene was just the car scene. I didn't submit the whole film.
I see. Okay.
They wouldn't have watched it. And then it was two essays explaining a past film and then explaining one of the films, which the other film I submitted was called Ghazi, which I shot in Turkey in 2017. And then a personal statement. I think that's what is required, and a transcript and CV.
And an interview.
And an interview. But it was funny because I didn't want to go. AFI was the only American school that I applied to.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah, I didn't want to go because I didn't
Now
want to
you
come
own
back.
a house here. What?
That's true. Yeah.
What
that's true.
other
But
schools
I
did you apply to?
The German film school.
Oh,
I
CFFB.
see.
But I didn't at the time. I didn't want to come back to the U.S.
You weren't ready. You've been out of it for so long.
I had sort of said like, what do you guys have to offer me here? And I said kind of come up against some walls where I started developing a feature to film in Turkey, but I didn't want to make it and have it go into the void. Like even if it goes to good festivals, I didn't want nobody to watch it.
Right.
And I thought, okay, you know, strategically, I do need to make the movie in one of the languages that I speak that many more millions of people speak to give myself a fair chance. And most probably as an American director, I need to be doing that in America, and I need to be doing something that speaks to America as the first step. So that was my motivation for applying to
Got
AFI.
it. Yeah.
But I didn't, I mean, I was in such a vicious mood when I came for the interview that I had, because I was just like, ugh, this country.
America.
There's so many things, you know, I was being obnoxious, but I also had flown from Istanbul to
I flew
LA.
from Cairo.
You flew from Cairo to you were coming
story.
from, was it a direct flight?
No, it was a stopover somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, I flew direct and I had come to LA, and in addition, I had some gnarly jet lag that was putting me in a mood. And I luckily was staying with a very good friend of mine who is she's kind of like my jailer. And she had also worked with me at HBS. Now she's a writer. And she was living in Echo Park, and I was staying with her. And the whole time I was like, I don't really want to be here, Dana. I don't even want to be in LA or America. And like, and she was like, Sydney, if you think that you as a female director do not need the institutional credibility that AFI will provide, then you can make that decision after you have an offer, not before.
Dana! Oh my God.
I mean, we love Dana, but that's next level. That's awesome. Good for her.
Dana.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
You've done such a great service to Los Angeles
True.
as a whole, Dana.
True.
Well done.
Yeah.
Truly
Round
she
of
did.
applause for Dana.
And she drove me to the interview. She drove me to AFI, and she vetted my outfit. And she was like, "Bye, honey. You're gonna do a great job." And I got
that attitude.
Fix that attitude. But you know what? The thing was, I didn't fix my attitude, and I brought my attitude to the interview. And at the time, I was very lucky because the person interviewing me was Peter Markham, who's the former head of directing at AFI, who happened to be he was an older English gentleman, and he's also very auteurist. And so because he's not from the US, he's not defensive about America. He understands the value of being here and working in Hollywood, and that there is an incredibly talented surplus of people in this area, which is why I love being here and continue to be here, that I do think some of the most talented people in the world do reside and work and create here. But he also understands that,
he's open to the reality that America is not actually a such far superior country.
Right.
How long did it last?
Exactly. The interview, I think it was an hour, but I remember talking to him and I think the head of the admissions dean, or her last name was Palafox, but he was asking me questions about that. And I think I must have gone on a rant about how I was so annoyed that Americans were like, it was okay for everybody to watch violence, but they can't see normal sex scenes. And I was like, what is this country that of repressed, violent people? And I think also a lot of the clips that I'd sent in were about human darkness and this propensity for violence, or this kind of dark animal nature. So that's what he kind of noticed in my work. But I mentioned that, and I was trying to articulate what my point of view was. And I remember telling him, you have to read this author who's kind of a cult fiction writer in Beijing, whose name I'm going to butcher, called Wang Xiaobo, who wrote several novellas that are kind of about students sent during Mao's tenure to these re-education camps in the South in the mid 20th century. And they're all, the character in all of his novellas is called Wang R, like Wang number 2. And he's this sort of bumbling guy who's living through all of this state violence, but all of the stories are told through sexual desire and this nostalgia for his youth. So I said that what appeals to me about this is that, like, even the thing that makes humans so interesting to me is that you can be nostalgic for something that was terrible to you, that was bad, that happened to you because it happened when you were young, and that was the sunny time of your life. And that I love that in those books I could feel kind of there was irony, but it didn't have emotional distance.
Right. There's also, there's something like really interesting that we haven't actually discussed ever on this podcast. So when you were at AFI, I want to hear, because I know you're so eloquent, and this isn't going to be an attack on anyone, about some of the debates you would get in with the other directors in the class.
I think, it's like, where do I start?
Because directing, people assume is this, that, and another. And the thing that we kind of have to remember is that it's a lot more than that. And so you at AFI, very different to how DPs worked, you at AFI as the director had to not only defend to the death your ideas and your voice of a director and what your style is and why this is right and this is wrong for you personally, but you also had to understand all the other departments and understand the approaches of other directors and why you are like that and you're not like that. And it's not just as simple as getting on set at AFI. It's like, let's go through the emotional, let's break it down, let's see what your decisions are. And so that's what I want to really hear about, because no one gets to hear that side of directing. They hear like, here's a storyboard, here's a shot, this is how I work with my DP, these are how I work with my actors.
Right.
But
the other side, the challenges of asserting your voice.
absolutely.
So
because you're on your own.
Sure. Yeah. So I will say, let me preface this by saying that AFI in the first year has this very brutal ritual called narrative workshop, where 140 of your peers, you come in pre-specialized as a director, writer, screenwriter, cinematographer, production designer, editor, producer. Yes. Different departments, whatever the departments are, the key creatives.
I think you found them all.
I was like,
there.
I think I
That's
may have
awesome.
said producer twice. But you come in pre-specialized, and there's total 140 of us. And every Thursday and Friday, your first year, 2 teams screen a short film that they have produced in a very inhumanely short period of time. It wouldn't be so brutal if you had already worked with those people, but the thing that they do is they deliberately want you to not work with the same teammates over and over again, because they want you to have exposure to new people. So it's kind of setting you up to fail in a way. And if you manage to make anything that's watchable, it's a miracle. But so for the first term, and on top of that, I hope they didn't get rid of this policy, but they may have, where everybody's given red cards and green cards. So you sit up there after you have directed a movie, not allowed to speak. It's like a preamble to working with the press, right? You can't just defend every move that you made, right? You're going to have to shut up and just take whatever people say about your film. So it's kind of practice for that. And you sit up there and people either rip your movie to shreds or they talk about why they like it. And you can't say anything. And you're actually, this feels very communist to me, that you are just sort of subject to critique. And I guess it's sort of all art schools where you aren't allowed to say anything. And not only are you being judged on the film, you're being judged on how you take the critique of your classmates. So you are constantly performing or authentic and judged for it. Who knows? So I've kind of described the format of narrative workshop as a kind of Soviet style critique in front of your peers. But the thing about the first cycle, which is like the first quarter of AFI, the directors, who there were 28 of us, were told to bring our own ideas and pitch them. And everybody came with all of the energy of whatever they brought into AFI. And in my class, there were 11 female directors, 17 male directors. And everybody came, and and the pressure was on to not be conservative and make something that you thought you could send to a festival or send to Tribeca. The point was to experiment, but also to assert yourself and your point of view, because you are going to have to team with people for 2 more projects minimum, not including the cinematographer-led project called the MOS. So you needed to define your point of view, and you were also encouraged to experiment, because we were literally not allowed to submit these films to festivals. They would have to stay at AFI.
Wow.
So the point was, show us your bones, show us who you are. And so I'm actually really proud of the female directors in my class, like so proud of them, because everybody took risks and everybody tried to tell a story that felt true to them. And I thought this was especially important, and Indiana knows, because Indiana shot one of the films that I so love, and which was called Horse. At the end of the day, it was Horse. With a Ukrainian director, that everybody was, I already said that the nature of cycle is that you're set up to fail in some way, because you're working with people you've never worked with. There's a lot of students. A lot of us have been...
Budgets are limited. You have 3 days. Like you're relying on the best, hopefully the best of what people can offer you in each department, and volunteer crew. So it's like, it's a gamble. It's a gamble. And I had come from Turkey, where I was shooting with commercial crews. So I had very different expectations for what was technically what people were capable of executing in a short period of time, versus like how long it was going to take us to set up a 360 shot, and how long it would take us to execute that or keep the subject in focus, because I'd been spoiled working with people. Or did people even know how to set that up? Or like, did they even remember the right number of pieces of track? Like, are you having to change your entire visual language the day of because someone forgot to order that last piece of track to connect the circle? Yeah.
Oh yeah, lots of technical constraints. So you had lots of these technical and craft constraints. Now combine that with if you combine all of these technical and craft constraints, and we had like a negligible budget, as Indiana said, and you combine those constraints with the fact that you have women who are trying to tell stories that already fall outside the parameters of what is an acceptable narrative about being a woman, that is a recipe for chaos.
Yep.
So you had people, because on the craft, like in order to, if you want to execute a story and have it be understood by audiences, and you're telling them something that they're not used to hearing, that might actually cause them some friction in thinking a different way about people, then you better execute 1000% on the craft, which of course is not going to happen. But of course, your trade-off is don't show your bones, don't show what you want to be, and then have people judge you on something that's not you, or do the thing probably imperfectly and just get on with it. And I'm proud that most of us pretty much all of us said, get on with it. And most of us were ripped apart in narrative workshop in some way, shape, or form. And I want to talk about the way that people got on with it, because I had come back to America as I said, in 2018, and I'd come back in 2018. That was just after the Me Too movement in 2017 started taking root. And then and I had come from this country where, you know, lots of people are living with dualities all the time. And because it has caught so much flack for being patriarchal or various things, all of the men that I was working with in film were like incredible, and they were incredibly sensitive and aware. And then I came back to an extremely polarized America, and we were dealing with that. And the thing that I thought was so badass about all of the women in my directing class is not a single person made a movie that said, and men are bad, I'm being oppressed by men. No one did that. And the weird part about that is all of us were fighting to defend gray area. And what we were trying to do, I think many of us were trying to externalize the degree to which we are complicit.
Define gray area.
Gray area in terms of, you know, for example, G made the movie Who Fed the Snake first year. So one of our classmates made a movie called Who Fed the Snake. And she in cycle 1, Chinese director, and it was set at a communist military training camp, but the preamble about a girl who is trying to get out of a cycle of subjugating her desires to pleasing men. And it's about her trying to, like, she signs up for the military because she thinks she needs a kick in the pants because she can't stop just capitulating at the slightest provocation from a man saying, I need you in some way. And part of that is that she's trapped in this kind of binary where once she does get to the military training camp, she's on the straight and narrow. She's got a boyfriend at the camp. And then 6 months in, she gets promoted over him and he can't handle it. So then she's weak, and she goes to the guy who's kind of like the beta guy at the military training camp that everybody's been making fun of. And they sort of have a moment of, oh, we're similar, you and I, we're both on the outs at this camp, after her true object of her affection spurned her because she just was doing well. And you see why she can't have the thing that she wants. She goes to this other guy, and you know, she's comforting him, and then he takes it as an opening, and she ends up sleeping with him, and then everybody slut shames her. But the thing is, in the beginning of the movie, it started off, well, there were 2 scenes. That was one of the scenes that was confusing for a lot of our male audience members. And the other one was in the opening. The opening shot of the movie was close on her face, her like bumping up against a headboard, having sex with somebody at a party. And the voiceover was her saying, why did I do this? Why am I doing this? What am I here? So fresh off the loudness of the Me Too movement, a lot of the men in our class had a really hard time parsing that neither of these scenes was rape or sexual assault. They were her having gotten herself into a situation for one or other reasons, in the middle of it going, ugh, why did I do this? This is a result of my own weakness or my own issues. and she's not taking legal action against anybody, but that she was doing it, and the guys in our class had a really hard time processing that. And I think that part of it is because they're not used to seeing it. The other part of it was the director didn't have as full of a command of English as she could have. And so consequently, the acting was not pristine. So it's like, if you don't have the craft 1000% down, you will leave room for interpretation in a place where there is already ample differences of opinion. So that was one example. The movie that Indiana, I don't know if you want to talk about Horse, which I thought was awesome. And I just want to say before this that in narrative workshop, when we would see these other directors get slaughtered, and by the grace of God, my movie ended up landing, but I was so prepared to be slaughtered, and I was watching all of these women try to say something, and they had inadequate craft, inadequate budget, inadequate team to do so. And then when it wasn't 10,000% clear, and people were like, I don't get it, or this is an affront to the BDSM community. That was the thing that was said about the movie that Indiana shot. And it was not about that at all. And people were saying things. I felt an obligation because our faculty weren't doing this, and all the directing faculty were men. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I thought they were really awesome teachers. Yeah. But they just had limits to what they could support, and they were trying to support us. And the message that the female directors would get is what they would say is, well, maybe this isn't a story for the screen. They wouldn't say, let me help you improve your craft so that you can externalize the thing you're trying to say. They would just say, people would say, whether it was our classmates or anyone, would say, well, some stories just aren't for the screen, and maybe this protagonist is passive, and that's why it doesn't work. Well, you could say that all of that plenty of bodies in America are quote passive. Women, people of color, lots of different groups, right? You get like LGBTQ people. You could say that these are passive bodies, but it doesn't make our experiences any less valid or cinematic. And I felt very strongly that reflects that judgment on these films reflects a lack of imagination. And so I felt very strongly that, and I could see how these women, and most of the women in my class, are pretty fierce. They are pretty damn fierce. They're pretty badass. You can kick them down 1,000,000 times and they'll get back up, which I do think was right. Yeah. That's really,
I mean, they have to in a program like that too.
You have to in a program like this, because the thing is whether or not people are doing it consciously as well, it's always people are fighting for resources. So even if it's not gendered, of course, the men in our class, out of just sheer competitiveness, would want to be like, that's not they would want to rip you down because they want to win, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's
you're
just
fighting
people.
for resources in a very simple way, because the next film you need the best DP. The next film you need like a great editor. And in order to do that, not only do you have to balance being you have to balance being authentic with good. Because other people need to work on your stuff, and you want to walk away with something that is like a good product. But it's like hard, because if you want to be authentic, but then you're too authentic and you push people the wrong way and no one wants to work with you, you are going to have the next film. You can't prove yourself because you're relying so hard on the crew. HODs. Yeah.
Right. And they won't be the best people for sure. And I say this, like, I'm still friends with almost everybody in my class. Like, I don't have any bad things to say about any directors, male, female, or in between, just because it is what it is. And that is that is 1000% a reality of being there. That with the women, because of the nature of these stories, and because women were telling things, like the acceptable story in Hollywood and in film is, oh, men are oppressing me. The story that people are not ready to hear is, I am complicit in my own oppression, and I have conflicting desires, and this is a primal scream, and let me show you the nature of female desire.
People liked your first film, though. They loved it.
They did.
Yeah. You got really lucky there. Not lucky, you worked really hard, but you know what I mean? Like, you talk about all this stuff, and I think you ticked all those boxes.
I did. Yeah, I did end up landing the plane, but I think I landed the plane partly because I'd gone through such hell in China.
So one of the things I did want to talk about, though, is the amount of work you do before you even write the script, or as you're writing the script. All of the 100 pages per character or background or images that can you explain that process a bit? Because I love breaking down how people work. And I think this is really interesting.
In terms of my process, I like to start from a very emotional place.
Yeah.
And if I feel like there's some kind of emotional truth of something, then I want to just push on it until we've gone so far you can't get out without going through. So I mean, in terms of that, and I also imagine my characters fully, so that I think this is something that when I'm working with actors, I love working with actors, and I never find it hard because I know not the entire story. I know what their issues are, the characters' issues are with their parents. I know what their first job was, and I can't help but imagine that so thoroughly. And it's and usually by the time you get to the script, you don't have to ask too many questions because it's there. So that's a lot of the work that I do ahead of that. But I also have at the same time massive mood boards. So I've got probably 2,000 images for my first feature. For my second feature, I've got 3,000 because I've been planning it for years. I just accepted that I'm not going to get the budget for it.
You're doing this on Instagram in folders.
Yeah.
You're doing this in Google Drive. You're doing this shot deck.
I do it. So it's funny because Instagram just added the function of being able to share albums.
Oh, good.
Which before
That's fantastic.
are very critical to my work with DPs and production designers.
I know.
Because I have sticky fingers and
she finds some cool stuff, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also helpful because I mean, like you introduced me to Petra Collins.
Yeah.
And right when I
stuff.
said, this is the vibe of this movie, and you said, have you looked at Petra Collins? So it's all to start a conversation with people, and just and you know, it's like directing is making sure that the vision in your head ends up on the screen, which means communicating as clearly as possible. The thing is, I should never just give the production designer or DP access to all 3,000 images because you will want to kill me.
No, we will pull the wrong things probably.
That's correct. So I know exactly what I want from each image.
Then you'll be like, I sent you 3,000 photos and you're still not getting it. And we're going to be like, but the light over here. You're like, not the light in that one.
Right. And you have to be, and that being a director is about communicating as specifically as possible, right? So some of the images will be, they'll convey something visceral to me. And some of them are saying, oh, I like this framing. Some of them will say, I like this color palette or this texture or the texture of the light. But I know what I want out of all of them. So, and then I typically will go through and be kind of collecting these images as I'm writing the script. And then by the time that the script is done and I'm showing it to a DP and I'm saying, oh, okay, here's the vision and then I will have picked different images. I will not indiscriminately give you 3,000 images because that is a recipe for being disappointed and angry at everyone. But I will choose them and I will say, this reflects the color palette. These images reflect the kind of framing that I'm looking for. And I will put a paragraph that says, you know, in my keynote or whatever kind of presentation to DP or production design, this is what I'm thinking in terms of framing, or these are the kind of lenses I'm thinking about, or handheld, still, dolly, Steadicam, and the kind of visual language, or this is the scheme. And then I like the DPs to come in and say, okay, how do you think about that? So for example, and I think this becomes more important the longer of a thing that you're shooting, right? For a short film, you can say, here's a really quick conceit, and you don't have to do too much work. And like, so for example, Gazi, the other film that got me into AFI, Gazi means veteran in Turkish, or warrior. And Gazi, the premise of it was at a family dinner, an aging patriarch makes a desperate play at relevance. And the idea was that this man feels that no matter what kind of specious forms of respect the younger members of his family are giving him, they would be just as fine without him. And he knows that the reason is his physical vitality, no matter what people say. And so in terms of how do you visualize that, this was something that I spoke about with the head of directing at AFI during my interview, that because AFI is really big on perspective and showing perspective. And in this movie, I never filmed an over the shoulder of this guy, right? The main character's name was called Zafer. Typical kind of film 101, people will say, oh, if we're filming this from Indiana's perspective, we're going to shoot it over the shoulder, an OTS, or it'll be literally her perspective. And then therefore it is her perspective in the film, which I that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not the approach that I chose for Gazi. I was interested in how can I make us feel the feeling of this older man who has been respected, who is the patriarch of this family, who's losing his grip. And he ends up making a desperate play, which ends up being a handstand to try to prove that he's still got it, because everybody's talking about yoga and doing physical things. And there is a sense that like that is the defining factor between being in control and not. So of course he makes this play at Relevance, which only alienates him further from everyone because of course he can't do it. And then the only person who truly understands him is his peer, his wife. And she comes to him while the rest of everybody's laughing at him. And there's a really great expression in Turkish that sums up that sort of theme, which is a wolf upon aging becomes the dog's fool. And that's sort of like the dark reality of it. But of course, like, there's this, if much like Icarus flying too close to the sun, like he wouldn't be human if he didn't try. Right. You have to try. So I wanted to celebrate that and also make this short movie where you empathize with them, because a lot of times people don't think about older people. And as if we're not going to become them one day.
Right.
And so the question was like, how do you represent that visually? And I actually, for that film, did not have a bunch of, I don't even think I was on Instagram then, but I got on Instagram late.
Yeah.
But I had a conversation with the DP, and we decided that I knew the location. So we filmed there in Para, and we turned this very dark red, velvet feeling living room with an big Ataturk, like father of modern Turkey, painting in it, into their dining room for the dining room scene. And then the camera movement, the idea was that it would make it feel like he was the patriarch, but losing his grip by using an overhead light, which was kind of like the Godfather effect. And we had a bunch of practicals around, but it was mainly this big light over the table. And that gave kind of, I don't want to say chiaroscuro effects on everybody, but it felt like it had gravitas. And then what the camera was doing was the camera movement was constantly undermining that. And the camera felt a bit drunk on purpose until he is finally kind of resigned after trying and failing to do this headstand, that he's resigned to kind of, this is it for me. But before that, it's like everybody is drinking and they're reveling. And it opens with a woman who's kind of like the drunk aunt telling a story. And the way we did that was having the camera on a dolly with a jib and using ingenue zoom lenses. So we had 3 different movement points for it to feel very kind of drunk. And when we were editing it, we were choosing parts of conversation that somebody who feels like he's losing his grip and is particularly focused on youth and physical robustness would choose to pick up on.
You're something to kind of dig into with the actor side of things. When not the onset, but the before, when you're casting, how do you evaluate self-tapes?
Actually, I'll tell you about when I was casting for the European financier role for the Chinese movie. Because I had a lot of submissions. So I cast for that. I wanted a German actor and an English actor. And I reached out to some contacts I had in London who were either one of the girls ended up directing episodes of Sex Education. And she was in the scene and knew people through a friend of mine. And I reached out to a casting director in Germany. And I said, this is what I'm looking for. I actually, maybe this is a difference than how people do this in the US, because I was still outside the US. I sent a full breakdown of the movie to the casting directors, and then they forwarded it to cast. So I know a lot of times you'll just get sides and they'll say, this is the basic premise of it. I had visuals. I had like a whole kind of deck that was like, this is the movie, this is the vision. And I sent that. And actually the difference in Europe was when these guys would audition, yes, they would send a self-tape, but they would also send a cover letter.
Whoa.
And that I have not seen anybody do in the US, but they would send a cover letter that were saying like, I really understand your vision. And it would get quite theoretical actually, for some of them. And the German guy who ended up playing the lead in it, who's excellent. I saw him, he did a self-tape and it was fine, but I actually relied a lot on the casting director. Because I said, okay, what's the point of this character? The character is a finance guy in Beijing who seems like a good guy. He's somebody that people would think is a good guy, but when he feels threatened or under pressure, he will go ice cold and do something quite dark. And I said, I need somebody who has the face of someone that they would trust who can go dark. And literally the casting director said, this guy has some darkness to him.
Oh,
and
that's great.
Yeah, and he'd been in 100 things. I mean, he's a member of the German Academy. He'd been in things everywhere. And I'm sure it was above my pay grade for him to be in a short film, but he did it because it was interesting and to meet a new director. But she literally said he has no, he has some darkness that he can buckle down.
And so then when you're watching, like when you don't have a great casting director who's able to really kind of like say that with you, and you're in thesis territory or short territory of just like, I don't have the financing to get the biggest actors we've ever had. And I also don't have the financing to hire maybe a good casting director or like a casting director in general.
Right.
You're watching 50, 100 for the leads.
Right.
Yeah,
For my thesis, Yours to Bury, my AFI thesis, it was called Yours to Bury, and all of the leads were children. So there were it was 5 children, and the 2 leads were 7. They were supposed to be able to play a 7-year-old girl and a 5-year-old girl. And I auditioned, I think, 250 people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So what does that look like?
So I did a kind of round robin for screen chemistry. So I had a very clear idea of what I wanted the characters to be, which I think helped. But I'm also looking for people to surprise me. So in terms of that, and the kids didn't send self-tapes at this point because they were so young. So they just came in and I said, all right, guys, get in here. We got a round robin for 5 days.
Whoa.
And I'm going to say, all right, I like you. You stay, bring the other one in. And it was like that for over a week. And it got to the point where I said, okay, these 2 kids are not playing well together, but that's exactly the dynamic that I want for these 2 sisters. And let's do it. But in terms of what I'm looking for, I mean, the girl who ended up playing Diffie, the lead in Yours to Bury, she was, she didn't necessarily look like what I envisioned the character to look like, but she felt like the character. And I said, I'm going to go with that. And she came in and she was like this scrawny little white girl. And she was supposed to be playing these kids from Southern Appalachia, from the American South, where I grew up. And there was a line that was her saying she was supposed to be combing her sister's hair, but she was doing it very passive aggressively and like deliberately yanking it. And then pretending she didn't know what the other girl was talking about when she said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm just trying to help you." So it's that dynamic. And she said, and there's a line where she says, "Do you want me to leave you looking like Keith, their ratty dog, on Steven's special day?" And Steven's their older brother. And for some reason, this girl, her choice that she made was to read as if she were a mega church preacher. And she came in, and I'm sitting there. Our casting director is black, the DP's black, and we're watching this scrawny little white girl come in and read. And she said, "Do you want me to leave you looking like Keith on Steven's special day?" And I said, "What? Who are you?" And they were all going,
yeah, that's great.
"Who is this kid?"
That's great.
And we were sitting there, and they were like, "Okay, she went for it." And nobody and I
choices.
Said, she made
choices.
She made a choice, and we were sitting there, and we were going, "Okay, that's not what I was looking for, but you made a choice." Okay, and then I gave her some notes, and this is why I don't love self-tapes. I like when people can come in and I can give them a note. I really don't like, I mean, I know I'm not in the
because we're collaborators as crew, and you want to start to collaborate with your actors immediately.
Be able to give a redirect and see if it'll happen without having to wait a week to see the tape again.
Exactly. And I don't, and I know that that's not the efficient way to do it, and that's not how studios work and whatever, but that I do prefer that. So I did give her a note, and I said, "Hannah, can we do, can you do less? And can you rein it in and just say it. And she was like, okay. But she had this weird presentation to her. And I hope that she doesn't get any less weird as she gets older. But she was like a cute girl. And the other thing that struck me about her was so many of the little girls who came into audition, and this is honestly tragic, but you can see it already happening when they're 5 and 6, is as soon as little girls are told that they're adorable and that is the value that is given to them, then all they want to do is be adorable, which is very one-dimensional. And it was bad because I would see girls doing
Haleigh's
that.
raising her hand.
Yes. Yeah.
It's awful.
It starts young. It starts
so
young.
Yeah.
It starts young. And so all of the kids that I had, I mean, it was her and there was another little girl. Both of the lead little girls are beautiful, but fortunately their parents had really, and it really is an uphill battle in Los Angeles, had really enforced that, no, you have other values.
Right.
That is not your primary value. And so they were mercifully weird. And that's what I was looking for, is for people who were unapologetically themselves, which is very hard to find. And so, and she was like that, and she did all kind of kooky things, but I thought, you know what, actually the problem with this little girl is the same problem that Diffie has, which is she can't fit in 100% with the other kids her age group because she's too precocious. And I mean, of course, casting children is different than casting adults because children have no craft. So you really have to cast someone who is that character in some way, shape, or form. And then I was just looking for who can do dialect.
When you're working with the adult actors,
yes,
it's what are your boxes ticked when you're looking at a self-tape, or which ones are like immediately no?
I mean, if you're reading it, first of all, that sounds,
hey guys, get memorized, or at least make it look like it.
It needs to be memorized. If you did not memorize it, at least decide where your character is in space and where the other characters are in space.
You want them to be aware of an environment.
I want them to be aware, and I want them to have a reality of doing within an environment that they have made a clear choice on. If you can't tell me where is the other character, where is this person, and you're not interacting with them as if they're there, even if somebody's feeding you the other person's lines off screen, then I probably wouldn't give him a pass on it.
We have to wrap things up, but I want to talk about where people can find you right now.
You can find me on Instagram. My portfolio site is getting a reboot.
Amazing.
So you can find me on Instagram.
We'll link that below.
Yep.
If anyone wanted to slide into your DMs, younger directors or actors or whatever, would you be okay with that?
Sure.
Amazing.
So,
I know.
please come back. Let's do more
keep doing
episodes.
it.
No, this is awesome. You guys are awesome. Cinematography for Actors is amazing.
You heard it here, folks.
Yes,
guys.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. Thanks, everyone. This was another episode of Cinematography for Actors. You can find us at cinematographyforactors.com, as well as everywhere that podcasts kind of happen, as well as YouTube. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.